Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're very excited to hear from our panel of students and educators as they share teaching and learning strategies from the past year. At this time, I'll turn things over to our panel moderator, Dr. Mary Slawinski. Mary?
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to day two. It's a pleasure to introduce this terrific panel of faculty and students who are joining us today to share some of the teaching and learning practices introduced during the last pandemic year that they hope will stick around. We've all heard the bad stories about how this went, and we've all experienced the bad stories on how this went. So we were looking to kind of see what are the things that folks would like to see persist. So we appreciate them taking their time to join us, and I'll go ahead and introduce each one just quickly. We have three instructors on our panel. We have James Brown from Shaw University. Welcome, James. We have Pam Silvers from Asheville-Buncombe Technical Community College. Welcome, Pam. And we have Jason Tucker from North Central State College in Ohio. So those are our three faculty, and we welcome them and thank them for taking time with us. All right, we also have three students. The first that I'm going to introduce is Cheryl Batista, who is studying information technology at Asheville. Welcome, Cheryl. And Cameron Schultz, who recently graduated from North Central. And we also will be joined by Elizabeth Sanders, who is a senior in computer information systems at Shaw. She's just trying to get logged in. So we'll go ahead forward, and when she joins us, we'll take a moment and just recognize her as well. So good morning, panelists. How are you all today? This is a great follow-up. Great follow-up to Jessica's presentation, because we're going to hear straight from the, as we'd say, the horse's mouth, but I wouldn't say that, so I'll take that back. All right, so to begin, we're just going to set a little context, and as you all know, we've talked about this already, that we don't want to go too deep into the particulars, but to set the context, I'm going to ask each of the instructors, each of the faculty members, and I'll start with Pam. When did your institution go online? How long were you fully online? And what did this do for your classes logistically?
Thank you, Mary. We went online on March 11th, 2020, and we had a 2-week break instead of a 1-week spring break and came back and were online. And I have still been teleworking since that time. At the time, probably the biggest transition was having students be able to have the technology for it. Since I'm a computer instructor, I was somewhat ready to be going online.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Pam. James, do you want to go next? How about you?
Sure. So my story is a little interesting. Last spring, I was at Forsyth Technical Community College, and I was teaching online. So the transition there was a little bit simpler. I was also a full-time PhD student, so going face-to-face at the time, so that switched to online. But we started around March, I believe, is when it shifted. Then I moved to Shaw University in the fall, and we were already planning on going online at that time. The biggest issue was the learning management system, just getting that in order, and even to this day, having attendance be translated into the database as we take attendance ongoing. That's still been a challenge, but that was pretty much the logistically the hardest part of the transition.
Okay, thanks, James. And Jason, you had a little bit of a different circumstance in your circumstance, yeah.
Ours was very interesting here in Ohio. So just as Pam and James mentioned, and all faculty probably could say, early March of 2020 for each of us was, I hope it is the most challenging time of my career, because I don't want anything to try to top that. We originally had a meeting right before our spring break about Zoom. We'd used it some, but we just had a short meeting on, we might need this for a couple of days, maybe a week. And then it stretched out to 2 weeks. And then all of our lectures are essentially still online today. With my bioscience program, our labs, all of our courses have lab components to them, along with our practicum course. Those are done in person or at one of our industry partners for students to get some externship work. Those were halted immediately in the spring. I had a lot of students. I tried to avoid it early, because I sent a letter the night that the college announced we were going online for a while. I sent a letter to all the bioscience students saying, yep, I know you have questions about the lab. I am trying to figure those out as we speak. We had virtual labs the rest of that semester. And then over this previous school year, both the fall and the spring, virtually all of the college's lecture components were online, and most of our labs, including my bioscience program, our labs were in person. About 90% of the time, there was a small window we had to take those online due to COVID numbers getting so significantly extreme here in the state of Ohio. And for me, the biggest challenge was developing labs, trying to figure out the best way to assess certain labs, getting the scheduling figured out. So when I had students in person, how could I maximize that opportunity and design lab assessments to get the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, before our students got to graduation and got to their work sites?
Yeah, and I mean, I know that that's something, Pam, when you reference the fact, you were teaching computers, James, as well, that makes it a little bit of an easier transition. I know that a lot of our audience members are in things like advanced manufacturing and biotech, where those hands-on labs are kind of a critical thing. And that became a big challenge. And of course, that was impacted by which state they were in and what kind of, because we had such a patchwork system of restrictions and allowances. So thank you guys for sharing that. That's great. So we get a little bit of a context there about what you guys were facing. So students, I'm going to turn to you guys now. And Elizabeth, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry that we introduced you, but now there you are. So everyone can say hello to Elizabeth. So you guys were sitting there and you got the announcements and you were like, holy cow. So my question to you is, what were your first thoughts when your campus went fully online? Did you have any logistical or technical issues that you had to deal with so that you could continue your education? So let's go ahead and start with Cheryl. Cheryl, you want to go first for us?
Hi, hello everybody. Okay, my concerns in the beginning were availability of campus staff and resources, hands-on learning. You talk about the labs, and then also the ability to interact and study with students, other students, because I felt that that was very important for part of the learning as you're going through college. One of the things that technically was a challenge in some instances, but not in others, was how well the learning management system was organized for the students, so that we knew when work was due and we knew what chapters we needed to be have studied, and testing dates and different things like that. And then one of the benefits, I think, was that to a great degree, we had to rely on our own initiatives to find information, to get through that learning chapters or week or whatever, because some professors were not always as immediately available as they might be if we were on campus. You could go to class the next day and ask a question, and but if you couldn't do that, I think that kind of inspired confidence in that we were able to get answers without just going right to the professor. So there were pros and cons, and I think in the end, the professors did great, the colleges did great, and I think we all learned a lot to move forward with this whole virtual learning thing.
Did you have any technological issues? Like, were you already set? Were you okay there, or?
Primarily probably internet service, because I'm in a rural area. But it was less about whether or not the service was there and more about whether the company was throttling down service. So that was a rural internet access, I guess, was a challenge.
Yeah.
Gone and sitting in the parking lot at McDonald's or something to connect, which wasn't easy in cold weather for hours. But that was my primary.
I know that in some areas, libraries, like the county libraries, would set up Wi-Fi, spaces in their parking lots and such too, to try and address that. But of course, there's a lot of different, I think, strategies that people ended up having to deal with those issues. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you. Let's go to Cameron. Cameron, you want to go next? You're across from her on my screen, so go ahead and ask you the same question. What were your first thoughts when they went online? And did you have any logistical issues or technological issues you had to deal with?
Hey, thank you for having me. When we first went online, as she said previously, I was super concerned with lab work because the degree in the bioscience program is predominantly hands-on lab work and experience with the different techniques that we had. Logistically, I was fortunate enough to live in town and have a pretty decent computer setup and internet speed that allowed me to stream the lectures and the lab work and videos. So I was fortunate in that manner. But honestly, my first thought when we went online was this might be the time to take a break after this semester, because I went into this super skeptical about online learning. I was like, I need a professor in person to ask questions to. But after the first right after COVID hit and we shut down for that semester, I actually got rid of all my fears. It worked out great, and our professor was amazing.
Okay, thanks, Cameron. Elizabeth, how about you? What'd you think? And then did you have any kind of logistical or technological issues that you faced?
Well, at first, we were told to be sent home right after spring break. So when it came to preparedness for the rest of the school to be online, that was kind of an issue for most people. But since I was a computer science major, usually most of the assignments and things that I had was on my laptop. So I was able to kind of transition more smoothly online. But at Shaw, specifically the platform we used for their online schooling, which usually was just for like summer school classes, it was converted to all schools. So they already kind of had like an infrastructure set in place. So then once the online school happened, they just transitioned everything onto that platform that they were already using. So it was kind of easy on that front. But yeah.
So I'm going to go a little off script, and I apologize in advance to my student participants because I promised I wouldn't. But so none of you three really had any issues. So just really quickly, did you hear any stories of, your peers? I know Elizabeth had mentioned kind of a little bit about how they got sent home and people didn't have what they needed, notebooks and materials and books and things. Did any of you have any stories of students who could not get on or didn't have the technological means to get on or anything like that?
Several people in my community didn't have service. They didn't have any service. And I think this was most of the students around my area are younger. So they're in the high school situation and the middle school and all that. And I think many of them were just pulled out of school. It was that, plus parents had lost their jobs. So I think there was a lot of children that just weren't in school. They didn't have access to the internet, and they didn't have the materials to connect, the resources, the devices. I think that changed probably in the fall. They worked through summer. They had that opportunity to get the support that they needed from the county and so forth. But that's what I saw in my area.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, so my mother, she owns a daycare. So for all of the students that would usually come for after school programs and things like that, they kind of worked with the daycares in the Wake County area to make sure that like all of the students were able to have their own hotspots, headphones, and they issued out computers to as many students as possible. So with that, it was kind of in partnership with like other institutions. So like if a child would traditionally go to a YMCA, like they would have to facilitate them full time to make sure that there was even some type of like productive learning environment. And so some of the summer camp teachers and things like that had to end up facilitating, around like 3 to 5 different students from completely different schools, and they all had different schedules. So it was really a wild time, but we were definitely able to help as many kids as we could that we already serviced. So
thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. So that kind of sets our context, right? Everybody's scrambling. We're all like trying to make it up as we go. But in all of that, some positive things happen. So that's why we're here. So let's move on to those questions. So I'm going to ask each of you one after another. And I think I'll start with one of the instructors because they've been sitting silently for too long and instructors don't like to do that. So Pam, I'll start with you. What change to doing business as usual improved your teaching or your environment for educating?
And I will have to say, I've always thought I was a good teacher, but I have some tips that I picked up that I plan on continuing. And I think one of my biggest parts is I had more of a tendency to come to the office and do my work, and I would check emails or something at night, but maybe not as much. And I think as an instructor, a split day is much more beneficial to students who are learning online, and even students who are coming to class are often doing their work at off hours, and they need answers to questions when they need it. And so we're due back in the office on August 16th, but I'm going, okay, if I go in the morning for a bit, then go home and have my break time, and then do work again in the evening, that's more beneficial for students. I definitely had always created videos, and I still do it. I grade homework via videos. I give weekly announcements via videos. And I had in my student evaluations that a student said, I was really concerned of an online class, but I see you so much with the videos. I feel like we're in person and I know you. And so I think, and the third one I'd say is great communication. And this is noticing when students don't turn in work, sending them an email and finding out what's happening. I had one student, for example, who his only internet was his telephone hotspot. And he had two kids who were doing school at home, and his wife and himself. And so his time to get the hotspot was really at midnight to 2 a.m. And one time I asked, can I call you? And he goes, well, no, because if my phone rings, it kicks everyone off the hotspot. So remembering that our students are non-traditional, and I think this really helped drive home of how many different things they have happening, and how as instructors, we need to be flexible and have really good communication. And I think those two things going forward would help our students.
Thanks, Pam. James, why don't you go ahead and go next? What change to doing business as usual improved your teaching or your learning?
Sure. So to Pam's point, I always thought I was a good instructor too. But it's funny how COVID really tests that theory. It kind of throws you for a whirlwind. And, in a traditional sense, I never considered myself creative, right? I can't paint a picture. I can't, or at least I don't think I can. I don't think it'll look very pretty as be a stick figure. But because of COVID, I discovered my creativity in terms of an instructor, right? So when I first started at Shaw in the fall, it was a mix of communication. Were we going to be online? Were we going to be face to face? Ended up working out that we were going to be online. But teaching computer science and specifically programming, I thought it was very important for them to see me work through problems in real time, in a somewhat face-to-face environment where I can have a whiteboard and step through logical expressions. So I ended up completely redesigning my class. So Mondays and Wednesdays were online and they were lectured. On Fridays, I would go face-to-face. Now that was optional for the students to come in, but I would go face-to-face and work on the labs with them. So at least they had the opportunity for me to help them through those labs. And of course, we had our mask on, we had all the safety precautions, but I just thought it was so important for them to see me and have me help them through those problems. Another thing about the creativity was, again, I thought it was very important for them, or for me, to have a whiteboard to step through problems. And so I found myself, for some classes, I would log on with my desktop, and I had a little touchscreen laptop as well. So I'd log in with the touchscreen laptop and write on the laptop and share that screen while I was giving lecture on my desktop. So it was a lot of different things going on, but everything was in an effort to help my students, to try to get those concepts to lock in, those logical concepts to lock in. But the biggest takeaway that I have from business as usual, and it's very simple, but for me, it's a very powerful tool that we have in our arsenal. Recording the lectures. So those recordings and making those recordings accessible. I started a YouTube channel. I watch YouTube and I had no idea how to start a channel, but I started a channel and I started uploading my videos, my lectures to that channel to make it as accessible. I uploaded it to the YouTube channel and to our LMS. Now, granted, like I said about the LMS, I don't think it was as intuitive as I would have liked. And that's just me as a computer science person, so I'm a little biased, but I would upload it to the LMS and to the YouTube channel just so that the students had as much accessibility as possible. And in the event that the LMS went down, hopefully YouTube never does. But that's definitely something I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to try to do even as we go face to face, maybe set up a camera in the back of the room and record my lectures just so I can upload those to whatever platform for the students to, ingest at a later time. And it actually helped me as I was administering labs because they would ask me a question. And I would just say, did you watch the video? It made it real simple. So that's definitely something I'm going to continue to do as hopefully we transition into a more face-to-face modality.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I've spent some time as an ed tech support for faculty, and I know that there's a lot of resistance to doing those recordings. And I think that this was one of those things that now that we've done it, it's not so bad. And it is very convenient. And of course, I'm betting we're going to hear from the students that they really appreciated that as well. Thank you. Jason, how about you? Business as usual, what shifted that improved your teaching and learning? Surprising or not?
So after we survived the craziness of last spring and had a chance to breathe, we have a new to ATE grant for our bioscience program, and myself and the PI on the project, we were having a meeting with our external evaluator and just talking about the struggles and challenges we had. And our evaluator, Jim Hyder, had a great phrase that I've probably used more in the last 12 months than I've ever used the phrase before in my career. And he said, COVID-19 provided us a disruptive innovation opportunity. That, yep, it was drastically changed how we did things, but it kind of forced us to reevaluate our lab assessments, our whole curriculum, and look, is any of this potentially just busy work that maybe we can kind of loop in instead of having 2 or 3 separate labs, maybe having one larger one that can test certain techniques, can test students' abilities for good documentation practices and writing lab reports. And just like Pam and James mentioned, especially with James, over the summer, I literally blew up a course of mine, my advanced techniques course, 2 or 3 times. I changed the schedule, and at one point my dean had to talk to me like, are you okay? I was like, I'm on schedule 5 of this course. And still, I think when the semester started, I was on schedule 6. But one reason why I kind of blew it up was because I wanted to maximize not knowing how long we were going to have students in the lab. And we all figured once, our traditional flu season started, everybody's closer together, even with masks and gloves on, that, COVID might get to a certain point that we even lose in-person labs. And that did happen to us. But what I wanted to do was really look at my critical in-person labs, the ones that I report to the advisory committee on. These are the ones I assess students' abilities to, analyze scientific data, to take what they took in their lab notebook and put it into an effective lab report. And normally those labs for that course happen in October and November. And I was terrified that come that time, I may not have the students. So I literally blew my schedule up, rearranged the course, and I ran it by our instructional designer 2 or 3 times, asked, am I going crazy with this? He said, well, you're kind of, but this works. I was able to get those assessments done earlier in the semester before we lost our labs. And that really, I felt, set our students up for success in the following spring semester, where our second year students, where Cameron was able to do this, was able to go to our industry partners and perform during their practicum, where they get that hands-on lab experience. So for me, it provided that opportunity. Well, it kind of forced me really to look at the program. What are the critical lab assessments at the end of the day that I know through our advisory board, our industry partners, they want to have students have experience with, the tools in their toolbox, as I like to call it. And then the other thing, James and Pam have both mentioned this, so I don't want to take too much time, though I want to hear the students' perspective on this as much as everybody else's, was being very deliberate in my communications to students, not just in the lab, but in our LMS. We use Canvas here at NC State. I have some working students, but our program is also part of our College Now initiative on campus, to where I had 16-year-old students coming in as juniors in high schools, now all of a sudden in the online hybrid world. And my first thought was, I do not want to lose these kids because they were 16. So I wanted to be very deliberate in having that instructor present. Just like Pam said, having those instructor videos, that little introduction, was huge. Having many lecture videos that James mentioned. I think I recorded about 400 of those last year, but I have them saved and labeled, and I'm going to use them as long as I can. And students really like the shorter videos because, again, some students, they only could look at their material late at night because of work or because of family obligations, because, again, daycare was a significant challenge here in North Central Ohio. So really, it was being deliberate, not just in communication to students, because I didn't want to be a hurdle to them. With all the other craziness going on with COVID, if they had to go into quarantine, or if they had family members with it or with work, I did not want to contribute to anxiety that students may have around COVID. So that was really a big driving force. That and the disruptive innovation opportunity COVID provided by having me look at the whole curriculum and make sure everything was lined up to maximize our students so they were set up for success.
Excellent. Pam, you had something you wanted to add, I think.
Yes, I did. The other thing, and this was a tremendous advantage of COVID that I never expected, was guest speakers for my classes. For fall semester, a year ago, fall 2020, I had 14 guest speakers. I could line up people every week. They came in on Zoom. I recorded them, and now I have those available afterwards. It was hard to get speakers to come into classes sometimes because it was a half day for them to drive to campus, come and talk to the class, go back to work. I had so many speakers. In fact, I have the luxury now of having so many recordings from graduates and from employers that I get to pick through and decide which ones to use. So that is something that has been a tremendous carryover. And I think even when we go back face to face, the guest speakers, I'll give them always the option of coming in via Zoom to save their time.
Awesome. Thank you, Pam, for that addition. Okay. So we've heard from instructors. They really like the fact that they could record their lectures. They like the communication tools. They enjoyed being able to, maybe not enjoyed is too strong of a word perhaps, but restructuring the classes so that they're a little tighter and a little bit more intentional, let's say. And then, of course, as Pam mentioned, the ability to bring in lots of different folks that you necessarily couldn't do if you were asking them to come to campus and such. So that's the instructional side. So now what we want to hear is from your all side, from the learner side. You're on the other side of the screen and you're receiving all of this crazy times, good things, but in the crazy times. So what is something that your college did, shift that they made or your instructors made to how they instructed that really was beneficial to you, that actually turned out to be a big plus? And this time I'm going to start with Elizabeth because she went last time. So we'll let her start us off.
Okay, I guess one thing was just the structure of how classes even ran. So some of my classes that were typically more of a lecture style, it kind of flips where our homework was to look at the lectures and then do the labs together as a group in class. So then that allowed us to spend that time that we needed to look at the lectures beforehand and take the detailed notes that we want to and not kind of have to rush through the process of learning while cramming all the information within maybe the 1 hour 15 slot that we had, but to actually spend that time asking the questions that we wouldn't have had, like been able to ask if a lecture was going on, or asking the questions for problems or things like that we didn't quite understand. And it also made us be more accountable of what we were learning, because if you did not watch the lecture the day prior to, it was kind of not beneficial to sit in on the class when we're discussing the things that we already studied prior to. So I only had one class like that before COVID happened, and that was like a math class, and it was an experiment they were doing to see what type of teaching style or like learning style was more beneficial. So seeing more teachers kind of adapt that style for more classes outside of like math, which is mostly like formulaic. So it was interesting to see how that was being able to be contributed through all of my classes throughout. So it became more of a Socratic style teaching. So we could just discuss the things that were happening in real time. And it kind of made it feel more in person versus coming online to listen to a lecture.
So you'd like to see that persist. You'd like to see that be kind of the model that folks use, where you're getting your. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. It would be like a split. So if there's a potential opportunity for us to discuss topics and have information prior to, just that would be beneficial, but also like the lecture style is also necessary as well. So just finding the balance for each class structure to see which style would work better.
And depending on the content, right? The content that they're doing.
Sure.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Cameron, you want to go next? What happened to you that you want to see keep going?
So my favorite takeaway from this was the actual asynchronous lectures, because I am a non-traditional student. Like, I started school at 29, so I don't have the luxury of living at home. I have to work to pay my bills and actually go to school. But the asynchronous lectures allowed me to view the lectures and the material at my own leisure. And this previous semester, we were in advanced techniques and pharmacology and toxicology, and these were 3-hour lectures normally if we were to be in person. To have to sit down and watch those every morning all in one bite might have been a bit much, but with them being broken up, as Professor Tucker did, they were a lot easier to use and follow along with, and I could do them on my own schedule. So we also had the externship during the same time, which made things a little difficult, but I was fortunate enough here for my externship that I could actually listen to my lectures while I was working. So that gave me the benefit of also being able to use the material and digest the material while I was working hands-on with some of the things that we were learning about.
So again, it's almost similar to what Elizabeth was saying, that being able to kind of digest and think through what you have and then apply it. Well, in your case, applying it in your externship, actually on the job, so to speak.
Yeah, it was very beneficial.
Well, that's interesting. That matches right up with what your faculty and the instructors are talking about doing. So that's good. We're in a good alignment now. Okay, Cheryl, what about you?
Okay. I kind of also go back to what Elizabeth was saying in terms of more flexibility for learning, as opposed to just maybe that 1 hour in class. It offered a lot of opportunity there to grow and learn. Also, with regard to that, the time issue, I don't know how it is for other students, but for me, it's about an hour and a half round trip drive to my college. So that's an extra hour and a half a day that I have for learning. And so the travel was a concern, at least for those of us who aren't closer to the college. So that's beneficial from the virtual perspective. I wanted to add something that, with regard to what Pam was saying, that was beneficial also in the virtual environment, which was, and not all professors were doing this, but I think that they were able to share among each other the advantage of doing it, and that is timely grading. That was a huge advantage from the perspective that if you've learned material and you've taken the test and you've gotten things wrong on that test, you're already into the next week of learning the next material. So to have quick grading made it possible to ask questions right then, get back in touch with your instructor. And then I would add that having instructors who are using that video as an opportunity to interact. It was almost as if Pam was just doing a great job with this. It's almost as if they were there. They were immediately available. If you drove over to campus or set up an appointment to meet with them, you could get the information you need. You could learn what you did wrong, because sometimes it's systematic. You have to know this in order to do well at this. So those were all very beneficial. And if I could, I just want to thank the instructors, all of you, for your dedication to the students, because I saw many people who were close to retirement as teachers who went ahead and retired because it was all so difficult to comprehend. And if I could, one last thing, Jason, with regard to the all the videos that you made, this is just an idea for a potential work study opportunity for one of your students, because they'll learn all about your terminology and so forth. But I don't know if your videos have closed captioning, but that's a great work study opportunity for them to come in and help you get that. Now, not all students need that, but with the rules of accessibility for internet, I think that's a good work study opportunity. So
Great
sorry,
suggestion, Cheryl. That's a great suggestion. Pam, I want to ask you a follow-up question now that Cheryl's mentioned this. So you were using the videos to do the lectures, clearly. Were you also using video to give feedback to individual students, or was it to the class as a whole?
No, when I get assignments, if the assignment is just really good, even then I might create a video, but I create videos that range from a minute up to 5 or 6 minutes. And so if they're doing an Excel assignment, I have their Excel sheet open and I can tell them what they did wrong with the formula. I have a class right now that they're doing a lot of papers. I can have the paper on the screen and say, oh, instead of saying you should use paragraphs, which for some reason students don't like paragraphs, I can have it open on the screen and say, oh, this would have been a new paragraph. And here, when I say have a heading, these are the headings, so I can pull up the examples. So in a typical week where I have assignments due, I create videos for probably 98% of them for the students as feedback. And I really try to also do them for students who did it right. So I'm just not getting a very good, but to actually give them video feedback. Another thing that I did before the COVID, and I now do also, is I have 2 due dates a week. That way, if a student gets behind, they're not behind by a lot of work. They're only behind by 2 or 3 days worth of work. And so I do 2 due dates a week. And Cheryl kind of alluded to this, but I probably am a little bit too compulsive of a grader. For me, if it's been there for more than about 3 hours and hasn't been graded, I almost feel bad about it. But I think students have to get feedback right away when it's an online class. And that's something to carry over. When I first started teaching, there was no internet, there were no emails. You just once a week printed it out on the dot matrix printer and turned it in. And so definitely a change in life.
James and Jason, did you use any kind of, did your feedback loops shift?
They
Jason?
certainly did. And I knew it was going to be very critical to try and turn feedback back around to students. One of the things I did is, Cameron probably hated me for this. I know the first years did because they kindly told me, but I had 2 quizzes a week and they had different due dates. The first one was just a very introductory quiz, and I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and I've been loving seeing what folks have been putting in the chat, what they've done. I've seen a couple of people mention something similar, that the first quiz due earlier in the week was just to show that students looked at the lecture material, started to watch the videos, and like they knew what the word transcription meant. They knew what PCR actually stood for. And then a quiz later in the week was a more module type quiz, a more summative type assessment, that it was, okay, what are the 3 stages of PCR and why are they critical? Those types of questions. So that way students could have feedback on where they were with the material. They could get that feedback before they get to one of those dreaded exams that are worth a whole lot more points. So I really leaned on those. The other lab reports, those type things, I kept those kind of traditional. But one thing I did, I tried to be pretty good with turning things around with grading. I know there were a couple things I did a boo-boo on, and it did take just a little bit of time, but I tried to let students know, yep, I know this is on my docket to grade, but here's why. Which is just, again, that being deliberate and being transparent with students on, it's taking me a couple extra days to grade these critical lab reports, but here's why. And so just really it was leaning on Canvas, our LMS, to do some of that heavy lifting for me for those quizzes. So that way students could have that feedback potential, weeks before they get to that big exam. So they know they need to spend some time on it, then, instead of they get their exam back, they did poorly, like, oh, I thought I knew that, and I actually didn't.
Thanks,
And,
Jason. James.
To steal Jason's phrase, in blowing up my class, right, I was trying to find ways to inject into my class opportunities for students to catch up, right? And because even from my own personal experience, I don't particularly like online learning. It's just not really my forte, but it's the circumstances we were given. And so as a teacher, right, I was looking for ways how I could give those students who do fall behind opportunities to catch up in some ways. So to Jason's point, I had pretty much every week 2 quizzes. And essentially they were basic reading quizzes. I kind of took them from the book. So they might have been out there. The answers might be out there on the web, but don't tell my students that. But it was essentially just so that they would have the opportunity or given the opportunity to look at least some of the concepts that we're going to cover this week. And the quizzes were due prior to the lecture covering that material. And the way I set those quizzes up, they were all extra credit. But how I did it was your total overall quiz grade could potentially replace your lowest exam grade, right? Whichever one was higher. The overall quiz grade, so you have to take all the quizzes, the ones you miss, you get a 0. So whatever that overall quiz grade, it could replace your lowest exam grade. So that gave them an opportunity to make up, say, for example, they do poorly on the first midterm. They could technically get a much better grade on it if they were doing the reading quizzes up to that point. Now, did most of my students take advantage of that? Not really. They didn't realize the benefit of it until, oh crap, I did bad on the midterm, But once the reading quiz is closed, you could not go back. So that was a missed opportunity for them. Another thing I did was, I forgot, I done lost the thought, but it was another opportunity for, I know what I was going to say. So within the semester, I gave breaks, so a week break. And during that break, during class time, I would answer any questions students have. I would not lecture. I would answer any questions students had. I would help them walk through problems that they had in their code, whatever it may be. And I also gave them the opportunity to make up any assignments or labs they had missed for 50% credit, right? So that was another opportunity for them to make up whatever assignments or labs they've missed. And I gave that at 2 points throughout the semester, right after the midterm and right before the final. Any assignments labs before the midterm, they can make up during that first rest period. After that, it's too late. They couldn't make it up anymore. Same thing for that last makeup period. So I tried to give them opportunities to catch up because I knew going online, it's a drastic shift, a drastic change from what they're used to. And just inevitably, some students were going to fall behind. And so I tried to give them that opportunity to catch up.
All right, thank you, James. And I know, kind of touching back to Pam's point about giving video feedback, I know that some LMSs, for example, Canvas will allow you to just hit a record button as the instructor when you're looking at someone's work and hit a screen capture and just voice over. That was a big lifesaver for me personally, because I was notoriously behind on my grading. And once I got rubrics and I got that video thing, it was just like Pam described. You put it on the screen and you're walking them through. And because it's an individual student, the closed captioning doesn't become as much of an issue. You can give the students an option to say, if this works for you, that's great. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll write up my notes. And I've, in all the time that I've done that, and that's been many, many, many years, because I taught online for a long, long time, never had a student say, hey, will you write that up? They don't want to have to read all your feedback. They're like, just give me a nice 5-minute little video where you're pointing at my stuff and you're talking about it. I'll take that over a written long diatribe about what I did right and wrong. So
the only student I ever had who wanted it in writing was goes, I'm sneaking looks at things on my phone when I'm at work and I can't do the videos. So if you'd write it all up, I could be looking at it while I'm at work. And so that has been my only complaint from a student. And I thought, why don't you wait till you get home and look at it?
Well, and of course, as mentioned by Cheryl, and I mean, we've all referenced, there is, of course, the accessibility issue. And in the chat, there's been some great tools mentioned, and this would definitely be a chat to save and hang on to if you're going to be doing this as an instructor. So there's also been some stuff going on in the chat, and I just want to throw this out, and I'm going to go to the students. So one of the questions, or one of the kind of the threads that has been going on there, is this conversation around enrollments, students coming back or not coming back, students wanting to come to campus or not wanting to come to campus. So we had some folks saying we're seeing a dip in enrollment because students are waiting to make sure they can be on campus. Others are saying if we don't offer it online, they're not interested. So I'm going to ask each of you, online or in person, what's your thinking? And Cameron, you get to go first this time because you haven't gotten to go first yet. So
my thinking with that would be,
and I know you're an anti-online person from before, so this will be interesting to hear.
Yeah, definitely wasn't a fan of online learning before, but now after these last 2 semesters where I actually experienced it without signing up for it, I'm a huge supporter of it. It made things so much easier for me to do and take care of, my work life and my home life, and then on top of that, school. So it made it drastically easier.
So if you were to, so online. But what about online versus blended? Would you rather be able to come in and have face-to-face a little? Would that be your preference over straight online, or?
I would have to say it would have to be blended, but that's just my bias because of the degree path I went down. Without the in-person labs, it would have been entirely worthless. I would know nothing because I would not have the actual skills to do what I need to do.
Right.
But yeah, definitely blended and online. I would take math classes and English and other classes online at this point, happily.
Happily. Okay, good to know. Elizabeth, how about you? Online, face-to-face?
I guess it would be the same for me. Like, I feel like most gen ed classes, if I did still have to take some, I would prefer to take them online. But like maybe some of my major courses where like I even want to like network with the students that are kind of going through the same boat as me, I'd like to have like that blended opportunity or maybe just an in-person opportunity. So, we could create those study groups and it would be like a more organic experience.
Thank you. And Cheryl, what about your thoughts?
I would say that it kind of depends on your major, or my major, I guess I would say. I prefer online classes with the exception of those that would build kind of team skills and then also involve labs. So if I were a veterinary tech student, I definitely would not want to take the anatomy class online because you really need to be able to pick up and examine those bones. And Cameron, you could probably relate to some of that. So I think a lot of it would depend on what I was studying. And as far as enrollment, I have to say, because we found out that we were going to have on-campus classes in fall. That had a lot to do with my academic planning, not only for that semester, but long-term. It was great news, actually, because for some of those classes where we actually do need to be online, and James, you may have some of this with your classes and your students. If you're doing some of that networking stuff, you really need to get a feel for what's plugging into what, and I guess you could do that online, but kind of that hands-on would make the difference. And so I guess I agree with the blended. It would just depend on the course and then your major.
And then, of course, blended is such a broad, it's such a gray zone because you can think of all the full spectrum of having a lab and having everything else online, or you can have where you're meeting maybe twice a week and the rest is online, or, or you meet once a quarter or once a semester when you all come together to do some testing or something. So it's really, it's kind of an interesting, but yet difficult thing to pin down at this point. So back to the instructors really quickly, because we've seen some of this in the chat. Currently, what are your enrollments looking like? Are you seeing any kind of, and can you attribute any of your shifts in enrollment trends to this desire to be online, blended, face-to-face? Jason, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so we still have another about 3 weeks, I think, before our semester starts. And our enrollment, it's for the bioscience program, it's slightly lower than what we had last year, just by a little bit. We do have more high school students coming into our College Now program, and we're looking to keep online hybrid for this next year. which that one kind of surprised me because most of the high schools in the area are going to be fully face-to-face. And we had some hesitancy, especially from when we talked with parents, if they wanted to have their children somewhere where it's online hybrid. But our numbers for our program in that route are actually up. But we've seen a little bit. A lot of our other hands-on type programs, again, just from the limited ones I've talked to program directors here, they've also seen a little bit of a dip. But I do think our like liberal arts type courses that are, for transfer, I think they're kind of almost busting at the seams because of students, again, kind of like Cameron was saying, getting a little more acclimated to it and realizing the value that a community college has, that even if they are wanting to go 4 years university or beyond, if they can stay home for a year and get a lot of those gen eds. So we've seen, I think, a little higher enrollment there. Our hands-on are a little lower, but again, we've got another about 3 weeks before registration ends and the semester starts.
Thank you, Jason. Pam, any reporting from you?
Right now, our enrollment is a little bit lower, but we actually have over a month until classes start, and they're starting to market it. What did surprise us is if we had 3 sections of a class, one was totally online, one was synchronous with Zoom, and one was coming to campus. The online classes have been filling first for all of them, and we're having to shift them around. We thought there was going to be people all wanting to come back to campus, and that's not the direction that we've seen it going. So our chair has been moving classes around, and if we've added sections, it has been adding online sections.
Interesting. And James?
So yeah, so throughout the pandemic, our enrollment surprisingly stayed fairly consistent, stayed fairly steady. And so that was pretty surprising. But one of the challenges that we faced was many of our students had limited resources at home, right? In terms of, particularly for me, teaching programming, one thing you have to have is a computer, right? And another thing is a computer that has some decent resources on it. And that was one of the challenges we faced. And just, I think it was coincidental. I don't know exactly the circumstances, but the school had a partnership with, I believe, Google for Chromebooks. Those are only for our freshmen and sophomores, and Chromebooks don't allow you to install the programming environment that you need to program. So there was a lot of workarounds that we had to figure out. But as I said, enrollment stayed pretty consistent and steady. So that was pretty surprising. It was a good thing, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds great. All right, so we're going to get down to our last questions because we're running towards the end here. So I'm trying to go, do we want to go students last or instructors last? Let's do this. Let's do the students next because they've been patiently waiting while we've talked through this. So final question to you guys. What's one thing you'd want instructors to know about the online learning experience from your perspective as a learner? So what's one thing that you'd really like them to take away? Not just these 3, but out there in our audience. Let's see. Cheryl, do you want to go first?
Can I think about it just a minute?
Yes, you may. Do either of you, Elizabeth or Cameron, do you want to jump on this one, or do you want me to go to the faculty and let you have a moment to think on it? Okay, no one's opening their mics. Okay, I'm coming back to you guys. Think about what you'd want your instructors to know when we from being an online learning experience. And instructors will go to you. What impressed you the most about your students and all this pandemic disruptiveness? What was the thing that impressed you the most in terms of just watching them get through this? And Pam, I'm going to you first because Jason opened his mic. He goes first. That's the way it works, buddy. Sorry.
So for me, without a doubt, it was the resiliency of students. And one thing I've tried really hard to do, especially because, with Cameron and the group he just graduated with, I had them in class for almost a year when COVID hit. So I felt I had a good rapport with them, and then built upon that for the second year. But my incoming first year students, I wanted to be very deliberate in connecting with them on a professional level, sharing with them, I'm here for them. And I mean, just like James's idea of having kind of like an off week was a phenomenal idea. I love that because there was a time, and I had a feeling it was going to come right after the first wave of exams for our first year students. And it was like 3 or 4 classes. And the first lab I had them in we know as instructors, when students have this look that they're just exhausted, that they're tired, all of my students had that, even my ones that are normally very jovial and talkative, they were kind of dead in the water. I was like, you know what? Again, part of my restructuring, I had myself a little bit of grace period in the labs coach. So, all right, shorter lab today. Here's your homework assignment for the weekend. And they all groaned. I'm like, go do something for 10 minutes for yourself. And I was like, sleep in. I've got 2 little boys. Please sleep in. That's acceptable. Go have a glass of lemonade. Go see a friend. And the following lab, I was like, all right, what's everybody's homework? And of course, I had a couple students like, homework. I'm like, no, what'd you do for yourself? And I think that really helped students. And then I was able to just talk with them more. We're very candid at the opening of labs. Like, what's everybody kind of struggling with? How's everybody doing? But again, seeing the resiliency of a lot of our students, that told me I've got to go into quarantine because, one of my parents was exposed, or I've got a loved one in the hospital with COVID, or something craziness is going on with work. And just the fact that they gritted their teeth, they buckled down, they reached out more. And I really think having our courses structured this way to where students could kind of do work on their own time really allowed them to hang with it and stick through it. So for me, without question, it was just the resiliency and the hard work of our students.
Pam?
I should have been faster with the unmute since my word was also
It's
resilience.
like Jeopardy. It's like whoever hits the
Right.
button first. Yeah.
But I'll have to say the other is really the commitment students had. No student starts the semester saying, I hope I fail out by the 3rd week or whatever. So it's helping them have that commitment. And the thing I emphasize all the time is communication. Communicate with your instructor, and as instructors, communicate with students, because as Cheryl said, if you can walk down the hall and see an instructor, it's one thing, but if you have to do it all, don't wait until you're sinking. Try to communicate earlier. And as instructors, we have to communicate when we notice that. And that's sometimes hard when you have multiple classes and a student's just a little bit behind. Catching that and saying, hey, how's everything? What's happening can be really important.
And James, what impressed you about your students?
They both stole my word. Right?
They were so quick on that little red microphone thing. Sorry.
But Charlotte University is a small HBCU, and so not only were my students dealing with the pandemic, which is big in and of itself, they were also dealing with the whole George Floyd situation, right? And that can be mentally taxing, right? Because they're getting hit from both sides, essentially. And so I even had some students who contracted COVID, right? And they had to quarantine, and as well as dealing with the social issues that were going inside the United States. And so for students to fight through that and to still show up to class and to still have a desire to get better, even outside the classroom, I'm truly and thoroughly impressed by my students, and I'm happy to see them succeed and do much better in life. And that's really what has impressed me the most, was the resiliency and desire and initiative to get better.
Thank you, James. And thanks for reminding us. That's absolutely true. There was a whole additional, all kinds of chaos. All right. Now I've given you your time, the 3 of you. Look at Cheryl's already clicked off her mic. She's like, I'm going first. But I did ask you first last time, so it's fair enough. So what's one thing you would say back at the educators in the room about online teaching? What would be one thing that you would suggest, or you would that you would like to see?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I got the question wrong. Well, I was interestingly enough, I would incorporate everything the panel instructors have said. But I think that that I was most impressed with the dedication to student success. Different instructors handled the whole virtual learning thing differently. Some of them had more experience with online, some of them didn't prefer it. And so we as students had to get to know that also about each one of the instructors. But I think in the end, the faculty, the staff, they were all dedicated to our success. And so I think that, and that incorporated what was going on in our lives personally, which I don't think you really experienced that prior to COVID as much. But I think that was heavily taken into account because every single student had a variety of challenges that they otherwise would not have had prior to COVID. So
Thank you, Cheryl.
thank you. The success, I thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you want to go next?
Sure. So one thing I guess that I really appreciated was sometimes the professors wouldn't make having our cameras on mandatory. So like that in itself, like having your camera on for a whole entire class period sometimes could be like really distracting because I sometimes like people wouldn't focus on like what's actually happening. They'd just be staring at themselves for like an hour and some change. So it's sometimes it's taxing to have your camera on. So I just appreciated those that understood kind of like that piece of it and just allowing us to kind of just listen and use like one sensory tool at a time. So yeah.
That's a great point, actually. That's a great one. I think we even saw a little bit of that over in the side from the faculty talk about recording themselves, it can be really exhausting to look at yourself forever. Yeah. Cameron, you're wrapping up for us. What do you think?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
The question was, what's one thing you'd want instructors to know about the online learning environment for yourself that you would like to ask them to continue?
I would like to ask them to continue being as responsive and dedicated as they've been. Like this last semester, Professor Tucker was amazing. Like if I sent a question to him and didn't hear back in like half an hour to an hour, like something would be wrong because he was just on the ball constantly, which was a massive help because I'd review material at weird times with lectures. I'd be like, hey, like I know it's 7 o'clock, but I have a question. And he'd immediately fire off whatever I needed from him.
Awesome.
It was amazing. It was helpful. It was great for us, and it really showed they cared.
That's fantastic. Well, that's a great way to tie this off. You guys, thank you all for your commentary. It's a nice feeling to know that we all got through this together, that there was a lot of dedication on both sides of the teaching learning partnership, let's just say. And you've given us a lot of great thoughts, a lot of good things to think about. The chat was great. For those of you that are on the panel that couldn't see the chat, it will be recorded. It's captured and it will be posted. So you'll be able to look back at, there are a lot of resources folks are sticking up there for educators. So hang in there. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to our intrepid conference chair, Rachel Bauer, and say goodbye to our fabulous panelists. Rachel, you want to take it from here?
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, you guys.